It was a bright sunny morning, the kind of day that made the glass windows of the city's tallest buildings sparkle in the light. The streets below were busy with people rushing to work, and the hum of the city was alive with energy. In the heart of all this, a towering office building stood, a place where some of the brightest minds worked in the world of tech. But today, something different was about to happen. Marcus Lawson, the new CEO, stepped out of the sleek black car that had brought him to this impressive building. He adjusted his tie and ran a hand through his neatly combed hair. He was tall, confident, and dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that made him look even more powerful. He'd worked his way up from nothing, building a reputation for himself as a leader who could turn failing companies into thriving successes. Now, he was here, about to take charge of this enormous tech empire. As he walked through the revolving glass doors, Marcus could feel the weight of the moment. The air inside the lobby was cool and crisp, and the polished floors gleamed under the bright lights. The lobby was filled with the sound of footsteps and hushed conversations as employees chatted quietly by the elevators. The room was decorated with modern art, the walls lined with expensive-looking furniture. Everything screamed success, and Marcus felt the thrill of excitement run through him. He wasn't just here to sit in an office and make decisions from behind a desk. No, Marcus had big plans for this company. He was here to change things. He was here to inspire, to challenge, and to bring something new. But what Marcus didn't know was that his arrival would be met with an unexpected challenge. He walked up to the receptionist's desk where a young woman named Rachel was sitting. She was focused on her phone, not even looking up when Marcus approached. He smiled warmly and said, "Good morning. I'm Marcus Lawson, the new CEO. I'm here for my meeting with the board." Rachel barely glanced up, her fingers still tapping away at her phone. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice distant. "The CEO isn't due for another hour." She didn't seem to hear him correctly. "You'll have to wait outside. The meeting hasn't started yet." Marcus felt a knot twist in his stomach. He had expected this to be a smooth transition, but something about this felt wrong. She didn't know who he was. She didn't seem to care. The idea of being asked to wait outside by someone who didn't even recognize him as the new CEO stung more than he expected. For a moment, Marcus stood there in silence. The lobby felt suddenly colder. He wasn't sure if he should be offended, amused, or just get upset, but he knew he had to keep his composure. This wasn't about one person's mistake. This was bigger than that. He smiled again, trying to stay calm. "I'm sure there's been a mistake. I really am the CEO," he said gently, but his voice had a firm edge to it. Rachel finally looked up, blinking a few times, her eyes widening when she realized who she was speaking to. But it was too late. "Sorry," she muttered awkwardly, still not completely convinced. "I'll have to check with someone else. Please wait here." Marcus glanced around the room. People were still going about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding. He wasn't going to let one small mistake stop him. He had bigger plans, and he was determined to see them through, no matter what. With a deep breath, Marcus calmly walked over to the chair near the door and sat down, still watching Rachel from the corner of his eye. The game was just beginning, and Marcus wasn't going to let anyone, not even a receptionist, get in his way. As Marcus settled into the chair by the door, he kept his gaze fixed on Rachel, who was still glued to her phone. The lobby around him seemed to hum with quiet conversations and the clicking of heels on the marble floors. Despite the calmness of the scene, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling of discomfort creeping up inside him. This wasn't how he had imagined his first day would go. The seconds stretched into minutes, and still, Rachel didn't acknowledge him. The awkwardness in the air was palpable, like a heavy fog that hung over the lobby. Marcus had always been a person who understood the value of respect. Respect for others, no matter their position. But here he was, the newly appointed CEO of a major company, and the receptionist, the very first person he had to interact with, hadn't even recognized him. The odd thing was, it wasn't just that Rachel didn't know who he was. It was the way she had brushed him off so casually. She hadn't even taken a second to really look at him. He was wearing a sharp, expensive suit, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his place at the top. Still, Rachel hadn't even flinched when he introduced himself. Marcus shifted in the chair and pulled out his phone, checking his watch. The meeting with the board of directors was supposed to start soon, and he had planned for everything to go smoothly. He had worked hard for this moment, and all he wanted was to walk into the conference room, introduce himself as the new CEO, and start working on the changes he had in mind. But instead, he was stuck here, invisible to the very people who were supposed to help him succeed. A few moments later, Marcus could hear Rachel's fingers still tapping on her phone screen. The only sign that she even knew he was there was the occasional glance in his direction, but each time her eyes quickly darted away as if he were an interruption in her busy day. It was becoming clear to him she wasn't interested in helping him. Marcus exhaled slowly, trying to maintain his calm. He had faced far worse situations in his life, but this felt different. This wasn't just about one small mistake. This was a deeper issue, a sign of something bigger. Was it possible that people in this company simply didn't take him seriously because of the way he looked? Because he was younger than the typical CEO, or because of his background? The thought sent a rush of anger through him, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to let his emotions get the better of him. Instead, he focused on the task at hand. He needed to turn this moment into something meaningful. He needed to make sure that no one in this company would ever dismiss him or anyone else again. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Rachel looked up from her phone and met his eyes. Her face reddened slightly as she seemed to realize her mistake. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. You're the new CEO?" Marcus nodded slowly, his expression steady. "Yes, I am." He wasn't angry, but his voice carried a calm authority. "I think we should talk about this before we go any further." Rachel quickly stood up from behind the desk and walked over to him. "I didn't mean to be rude," she said, sounding flustered now. "I just didn't realize—" Marcus raised a hand to stop her. "It's all right," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "But I think you should understand something." For a moment, he didn't say anything. He let the silence build, letting Rachel feel the weight of his words. This wasn't just about one person's mistake. This was a chance to show that change was coming, a change he was ready to make. "I'm not just here to be a CEO," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto hers. "I'm here to make sure that everyone in this company is treated with the respect they deserve. No one gets ignored. No one gets dismissed." Rachel's eyes widened. "Of course," she said quickly, now visibly uncomfortable. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Marcus stood up from the chair, his posture tall and confident. He didn't have time for small talk. He had bigger things to focus on. But the conversation with Rachel had made something clear. This company had a long way to go before it truly understood what respect and inclusion meant. Without another word, Marcus turned and walked toward the elevator. As the doors slid open, he paused for a moment. Rachel was still standing by the desk, her face a mix of confusion and realization. The elevator doors closed behind him, but Marcus knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning of the changes he was about to make. As Marcus stepped into the elevator, he didn't look back. He wasn't angry, though a small part of him felt the sting of the receptionist's dismissive attitude. But Marcus wasn't the type to dwell on small slights. Instead, he focused on the big picture, the task at hand. He had come here for a reason, and he wasn't going to let one small incident derail his plans. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft ding, and Marcus pressed the button for the top floor, where the board of directors were waiting. He leaned back against the polished metal wall and closed his eyes for a moment. The soft hum of the elevator was the only sound in the air, but Marcus's mind was anything but quiet. He was replaying the events in the lobby over and over again. How could someone not recognize me, he thought. I'm here to lead this company into a new era. I've worked hard to get here. So why didn't she even blink when I said I was the CEO? Marcus had always known that his rise to power hadn't been easy. He had fought through prejudice, doubt, and many other barriers to get where he was today. People didn't expect him to succeed because of his background, his appearance, and his age. But now, as the CEO of a company worth millions, it was hard to ignore how much further he still had to go to make sure everyone understood that change was not just coming, it was already here. The elevator slowed as it neared the top floor. Marcus stood up straighter, straightening his tie and adjusting his jacket as the doors opened with a soft swoosh. The moment he stepped out, a rush of energy hit him. This was it. The moment he had been preparing for. The board of directors was waiting in the large, sleek conference room, ready to meet him. They didn't know what was coming, but Marcus was determined to show them. He was going to challenge everything they thought they knew about leadership, about success, and about who was worthy of being in charge. He walked down the corridor toward the boardroom, his footsteps echoing on the glossy floor. He could feel the eyes of the employees around him as they turned to watch him pass. But he didn't let that distract him. He had a purpose. He had a vision. As he reached the door to the conference room, he paused. For a split second, he felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. The people in that room had worked their way up in the company for years, some decades. They were seasoned, experienced, and probably didn't expect someone like him to come in and shake things up. But Marcus wasn't afraid. If anything, he was more certain than ever that he was the right person for the job. He pushed open the door and the sound of quiet conversation stopped instantly. All eyes turned toward him as the room fell silent. A long, sleek wooden table stretched out before him, and around it sat the top executives of the company, each with a look of curiosity, or was it skepticism, on their faces. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus said, his voice strong and clear. He walked confidently to the head of the table, his steps steady as he took his seat. "I'm Marcus Lawson, your new CEO." There was a brief pause, and some of the directors exchanged glances. Marcus didn't flinch. He had been in high-stakes meetings before, where people doubted him, underestimated him, and challenged him, but none of that mattered now. "I've been hired to do one thing," he continued, leaning forward slightly, his eyes scanning the room. "And that's to turn this company into something better, something greater. We're going to change the way we do things, from the top down. And the first thing that's going to change is how we treat each other. We're going to build a culture where everyone is seen, heard, and respected." The room was still, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning in the background. Marcus could see the uncertainty in some faces, the way a few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but he didn't back down. "The first step," Marcus said, his tone firm, "is that we're going to be honest with ourselves. We can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not. Change is coming, and if you're not on board, then we'll have to find someone who is." He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. For a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of fear in their eyes. Or was it respect? Either way, he was certain that things were about to change. The company might have had a long history, but with Marcus in charge, it was going to have a new future. One that included everyone, no matter who they were or where they came from. And as he sat there, looking around the room at the people who were supposed to help him lead, Marcus knew that the real work was just beginning. The tension in the room was thick. The board members, who had initially seemed curious and polite, now appeared uneasy. Their faces were a mixture of disbelief and uncertainty. As Marcus sat there observing them, he could feel the weight of their doubt pressing in on him. He had been hired to lead, but clearly it wasn't going to be as easy as walking into the room and announcing it. Marcus had worked hard to get here, to this exact moment. He knew how to handle tough situations. He had done it before, countless times, in fact. But what was different about this situation was the room full of seasoned professionals, people who had been in the business world for decades. Looking at him like he was some sort of outsider, he could almost hear their thoughts. Who is this young guy? And what does he know about running a company like this? But Marcus wasn't about to let that stop him. He had no time for self-doubt. The stakes were too high. The company had hired him for a reason, because it needed change. And Marcus was ready to bring that change, whether these board members were ready or not. His phone buzzed on the table in front of him, breaking the silence that had settled over the room. The sudden sound startled the board members, and a few glanced nervously at one another. Marcus picked up the phone without hesitation, his eyes still locked on the room. He had expected a call. In fact, he was counting on it. "Excuse me," he said calmly, holding his finger up as if asking for a brief moment of privacy. Then he swiped the phone screen and tapped the call button. He put it on speaker, ensuring everyone in the room could hear. "Marcus," came the voice on the other end, a calm and familiar tone. "We've got all the information you asked for. Everything's ready for the first phase of the changes. The team is already working on the restructuring plan. Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling the tension from earlier begin to dissolve. This was exactly what he needed, confirmation that things were moving forward. Great. Send it over to my office right after this meeting, he said, keeping his tone even but firm. The board members looked on, their eyes narrowing in curiosity. Marcus could see them wondering, what's going on? What does this have to do with us? But he wasn't done yet. He could feel the opportunity to shift the room's dynamic slipping through his fingers if he didn't seize it now. He ended the call with a few more quick instructions and placed the phone back on the table. That was my team, Marcus said, glancing around at the executives. They're already working on the restructuring plan. We're moving fast because that's how change happens. Quickly, decisively, and with purpose. The air in the room had shifted slightly. No one spoke for a moment, but the tension that had hung in the air earlier seemed to fade just a little. Marcus took that as a sign that he was starting to break through. He knew that the board had a lot of power, but he also knew that change couldn't wait. He couldn't afford to be passive. The company was at a crossroads, and he had to lead it in the right direction, even if it meant pushing these people out of their comfort zones. Here's the thing, Marcus continued, leaning forward slightly. We can no longer afford to run this company as if we're immune to the changes happening in the world around us. We've been holding on to the old ways of doing things for too long. We're not going to wait around for things to get worse before we act. We're going to act now. A few heads nodded, but others exchanged glances. There were whispers now, and Marcus could tell that some were skeptical, wondering if he was being too brash, too quick. But that was the thing about leadership. You couldn't wait for the perfect moment. You had to make the moment perfect. You can keep doubting me, Marcus said, his voice steady but sharp. But what's happening outside these walls is already changing everything. Our competitors are moving faster. Our customers are expecting more. And if we don't step up, we'll be left behind. The room grew silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. One that felt like the calm before a storm. The air crackled with anticipation. The board members were listening now. They could see it in his eyes. He wasn't backing down. He was in charge. Marcus glanced around the room one last time, making sure to meet the eyes of each board member. This is happening whether you're ready for it or not. The changes are coming, and I expect every one of you to be on board. And with that, he stood up. The room was still as he walked toward the door, leaving the board members in stunned silence. They had no choice now but to follow his lead. As Marcus turned to leave the boardroom, the heavy door creaked closed behind him, and he felt a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. His words had had an impact. The board members were silent, processing what he had just said. Marcus could feel their eyes on his back, their minds whirring with thoughts, questions, and doubt. But that didn't matter to him. He wasn't here to be liked. He was here to lead, and sometimes leadership meant doing things that others weren't ready for. He walked briskly down the long corridor, the sound of his polished shoes echoing off the marble floors. His mind was already racing ahead, thinking about the next steps, the restructuring plan, the changes that were going to take place across the company. There was a fire burning inside him now, the kind that came from knowing he was doing what needed to be done. But before he could make it to the elevator, he was stopped in his tracks. A deep voice broke through the quiet buzz of the hall. "Excuse me, sir. You need to leave." Marcus paused and turned slowly to face the security guard, a tall, muscular man with a stern expression. The guard was standing in front of the elevator, blocking his path. He looked familiar, but Marcus couldn't quite place him. The man had his arms crossed over his chest, and his gaze was fixed on Marcus with a sharp, almost challenging look. Marcus raised an eyebrow, confused. "I'm sorry, I don't think I understand. I'm the CEO of this company." The security guard didn't seem impressed. He stepped forward, his shoes clicking loudly against the floor. "I don't care who you are. I've been told to make sure no one gets past this point unless they have authorization." His tone was firm, almost cold. Marcus could tell that the guard wasn't backing down. A sharp sense of déjà vu washed over Marcus. He had faced this type of resistance before. People questioning him, doubting him, trying to put him in his place. But this time, he wasn't about to let anyone, not even a security guard, stop him. "I assure you, I'm the one who belongs here," Marcus said, keeping his voice even. His hand instinctively reached into his suit pocket, pulling out his phone. Without breaking eye contact, he dialed the number of the head of security, an old colleague of his from a previous company. It only took a few seconds for the call to go through. "Greg, I need you to speak to the guard at the front," Marcus said into the phone. "There's a misunderstanding, and I'd like to get it cleared up right away." The guard looked surprised, clearly not expecting Marcus to take action so quickly. His posture stiffened, but he didn't say anything. Marcus could feel the tension building between them. It was as if the room itself was holding its breath. The call was brief, but it was enough. When Marcus hung up, he turned back to the guard, who was still standing in front of the elevator. "You'll be getting a call from the security office soon," Marcus said, his voice calm but authoritative. "I suggest you clear up the misunderstanding before it gets out of hand." The security guard's face reddened slightly, but he didn't argue. He shifted his weight awkwardly, realizing that Marcus was serious. "I wasn't told that the new CEO was here today," the guard muttered, clearly uncomfortable. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." Marcus nodded slightly, his gaze unwavering. "Make sure it doesn't." With that, the elevator door slid open, and Marcus stepped inside, not giving the guard another glance. He had bigger things to focus on. As the elevator ascended, he leaned back against the wall and exhaled slowly, allowing the tension to ease from his shoulders. It was moments like this that tested his patience, but he knew better than to let things like this rattle him. People would try to stand in his way. It was inevitable. But what mattered was how he responded. And today he had shown them exactly who was in charge. As the elevator hummed its way to the top floor, Marcus thought about the next steps. There were more battles ahead, ones that would require even more focus, strategy, and decisiveness. But this small moment, this one insignificant interaction with a security guard, had already taught him something important. He couldn't afford to let anyone stop him. Not now, not ever. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Marcus stepped out onto the top floor, the nerves from his earlier encounter already starting to fade. He knew the guard wasn't a real threat, just another hurdle to overcome. But it had been an unexpected reminder of something that he already knew all too well. Change wasn't going to be easy, and people were going to challenge him at every step. Still, he kept his focus. The hallway leading to his office was quiet, with the low hum of fluorescent lights overhead providing the only sound. He passed a few employees along the way, some of whom glanced up at him with uncertain expressions. Marcus didn't take it personally. He had experienced this before. The stares, the whispers, the uncertainty. It was just part of the process when you were new, especially when you were stepping into a leadership role. But as he walked past them, he knew he had to stay calm. His presence needed to be a steadying force. If the company was going to change, he had to be the first to show what that change looked like. As he approached his office door, Marcus took a moment to pause and collect his thoughts. This was it, his domain, the place where all his decisions would be made. He placed his hand on the door handle, hesitated, then opened it. The room was exactly as he had imagined it, sleek, modern, but empty. The view of the city below was breathtaking, the skyline stretching endlessly into the horizon. But the emptiness of the room struck him more than the view. It felt cold, impersonal. It felt like a room that had been waiting for someone to make it their own. Marcus walked across the room, his shoes tapping softly on the polished floor as he moved to the large desk. He ran his fingers over the surface, smooth and perfect, untouched. He sat down in the leather chair, leaning back for a moment and closing his eyes. He thought about the long road that had brought him here. Every moment, every challenge, every setback had led to this point. The sound of footsteps broke through his reverie, and Marcus opened his eyes to find his assistant, Emily, standing in the doorway. She was holding a stack of papers in one hand and a tablet in the other, her face a mixture of uncertainty and professionalism. "Good afternoon, Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice steady but betraying just a hint of nervousness. She had been with the company for a few years and had seen the previous CEO, a much older, more traditional leader, run things in a way that felt like the same old routine. She had no idea what to expect from Marcus. "Afternoon, Emily," Marcus replied, trying to put her at ease with a smile. "Please, come in. What's on the agenda for today?" She stepped into the room and set the papers down on the desk. pausing for a moment before speaking. There's a lot of work to be done. The team is waiting for the official announcement regarding the restructuring, but there are also some updates about the upcoming board meeting. They'll want to know what your next move is. Marcus nodded, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk as he thought. I don't have time for the usual slow-moving plans and debates, he said, his voice firm but calm. We need to act quickly, and we need everyone on board. Not just the board of directors, but everyone in this company. They need to see that things are changing, and they need to see it now. Emily hesitated. She was a sharp woman, but even she was having a hard time adjusting to the idea that the new CEO would be making moves so quickly without the usual corporate red tape. Mr. Lawson, she began, but he cut her off. Emily, he said, his tone gentle but direct. This company isn't going to wait for things to happen. We're going to make them happen. Her eyes flickered with a mix of surprise and admiration. She had expected him to be a bit more reserved, especially after the initial shock of his arrival. But now she was seeing something different. Someone who wasn't afraid to take charge, to shake up the norm. I'll get to work on the announcement, she said, her voice stronger now. And I'll coordinate with HR about the restructuring plans. I'll also make sure the team understands the urgency of everything. Marcus gave a single nod of approval. Good. We need to move fast. Let's start this week with the first wave of changes. I want to make sure everyone knows that this company is no longer about maintaining the status quo. We're here to disrupt, to innovate, and to lead the industry. Emily left the room, and Marcus sat back in his chair, once again staring out at the city below. The weight of the moment felt heavy, but it was also exhilarating. He wasn't just a leader in name. He was going to lead this company to a new future. A future where he wasn't just the CEO, but a force of change that no one could ignore. The battle, he knew, wasn't just with the board or with the executives. It wasn't even with the guard who had tried to stop him. As the hours passed, the weight of the day's events began to settle in. Marcus sat in his office watching the steady stream of emails and notifications on his screen, but his mind wasn't entirely focused on the messages. He was preparing for the real challenge, the first major test of his leadership. His goal was clear. He needed to show the entire company that things had changed and that the new direction wasn't just a vision, but a reality. He checked the clock. It was almost time for the all-hands meeting, where Marcus would officially announce the company's restructuring plan to all employees. The room would be packed with staff from every department, from junior assistants to senior managers. The employees had no idea what to expect from him. They had heard rumors about the new CEO, but no one had any real sense of who Marcus Lawson was or what he stood for. Marcus stood up and straightened his tie in front of the full-length mirror in his office. The reflection staring back at him was calm, composed, and confident, but inside his heart was racing. He knew this was a make-or-break moment. If he faltered now, it could undermine everything he had worked so hard to achieve. The meeting was being held in the large conference room, the one with the sleek glass walls that overlooked the entire city. Employees were already filing in, chatting in hushed voices, some of them trying to figure out what the day's announcement would mean for their jobs, for their future at the company. As Marcus stepped into the conference room, the room fell silent. Every single employee turned to look at him, their faces filled with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. His steps echoed loudly in the vast open space as he made his way to the front of the room, where a projector screen displayed a title slide that read, "The Future of the Company." Marcus paused for a moment, surveying the sea of faces, feeling the intensity of the moment. It was as if everyone was waiting for him to make a mistake, to show any sign of weakness. He took a deep breath, adjusting his posture, and then began. "Good afternoon, everyone," he said, his voice booming across the room. "I'm Marcus Lawson, your new CEO, and today we're going to talk about change, big change." There was a collective murmur among the employees. Some seemed confused, while others exchanged quick glances. But Marcus wasn't fazed. He had known this moment would come, and he had been preparing for it for years. He was no stranger to challenging situations, and if there was one thing he had learned, it was that people only followed leaders who were clear and direct. "Over the last few months, I've spent a lot of time getting to know this company. Marcus continued, pacing slowly in front of the group. And what I've learned is that we have a lot of potential, but we also have a lot of work to do. We've been moving too slowly, too safely, and that has to change. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The company had been successful, at least in terms of profits, but Marcus could see that the employees had grown complacent. They were used to the way things had always been done. Predictable, routine, risk-averse. But that wasn't going to work anymore. We're going to restructure how we operate, how we innovate, and how we collaborate, Marcus said, his voice growing more determined. I'm not here to play it safe. I'm here to take us to the next level. And that means challenging everything we've done before. There was a pause, a flicker of hesitation in the crowd. Marcus could feel the tension in the room. This was the moment where some of them might start to doubt him, but he couldn't afford to let that happen. He had to make them believe. We're going to focus on building stronger teams. We're going to invest in new technologies and better processes. And most importantly, we're going to start trusting each other. No more siloed departments, no more waiting for approvals from the top. It's time for all of us to step up. Marcus's words were met with a few surprised looks and a few uncertain nods, but he could see that his message was starting to sink in. He wasn't going to sugarcoat things. Change was hard. It was messy, but it was also necessary. I know some of you might be feeling nervous right now, he continued, his tone softening slightly, but I promise you, this is going to be worth it. We're going to build something bigger, something better, together. With that, Marcus hit a button on the projector remote and a new slide appeared. A bold graphic showing the proposed restructuring plan with new teams, new leadership roles, and a timeline for the next steps. The room remained silent, the employees processing what they had just heard. Marcus took a deep breath and gave them one last look. Change won't be easy, he said, his voice now resolute, but it's happening, and I need each of you to be a part of it. This is our future, and we're going to make it happen. Together. He could hear the whispers beginning to spread as the employees exchanged uncertain looks. But there was something different about the way they were talking now. It was no longer fear or skepticism. It was curiosity, hope, and maybe even excitement. As Marcus walked out of the room, his mind was already racing with the next steps. The real work had just begun. Marcus had barely returned to his office before the first of the questions began to come in. The emails, the calls, the messages, they were all flooding in at once. His assistant, Emily, appeared at his door with a worried look on her face, holding a tablet in her hands. Mr. Lawson, she began, her voice tight. I've been receiving messages from some of the senior managers. They're not happy with the announcement. They have concerns about the restructuring. They want to talk. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He had expected this, but it still stung. The pushback from employees, especially from the senior management team, was always the hardest part of change. These were the people who had been in the trenches for years, and now he was asking them to change everything they knew. It wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't back down now. All right, set up a meeting, he replied, standing up and walking over to the window, where he looked out over the city. We need to address this head-on. Emily nodded and left, and soon after, Marcus was sitting at the head of a conference table in a smaller meeting room, facing several of the senior managers. They all looked serious, their arms crossed, their faces tense with frustration. One of them, Carl, the head of operations, spoke first. Marcus, I'll be blunt, Carl said, his voice low but firm. What you've proposed today is too much, too fast. This company has been running smoothly for years. We've had a good track record. There's no need to shake things up like this. Marcus listened carefully, his face calm but his mind worrying. Carl was right about one thing. The company had been successful in the past, but success had made them complacent, and complacency was dangerous. I understand your concern, Carl, Marcus said, his tone measured. But let me ask you something. How long do you think we can continue doing things the same way before we start losing ground to our competitors? How long can we stay ahead if we don't innovate? We're not in the same place we were 5 years ago. Carl opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus held up a hand to stop him. I know it's a big change, he continued, his eyes scanning the room, making sure to look each manager in the eye. But this is necessary. We can't afford to wait for the world to change around us. We have to be the ones leading that change. And that's going to take a new way of thinking, new processes, and yes, a new structure. There was a moment of silence in the room. Marcus could feel the weight of the conversation pressing in. These were the people who had the most influence within the company. If they didn't buy into his vision, he would be fighting an uphill battle. Finally, another manager, Janice from marketing, spoke up. "But Marcus, how do you expect us to get buy-in from our teams? They're already nervous about what this means for their jobs. They don't want to be the ones left behind in all this restructuring." "I know it's hard, Janice," Marcus replied, "but the fear of change is something we can overcome with transparency. We need to communicate with our teams and show them why this is happening. We need to tell them that this isn't about firing people or reducing staff. This is about creating a company that's stronger, more adaptable, and better equipped to face the future." Carl shook his head, looking unconvinced. "And what about the long-term consequences? What if we lose our identity in the process? We've built a strong brand here. What happens if all this restructuring ends up hurting that?" Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I hear you, Carl. I really do. But sometimes to grow, you have to break down parts of who you are in order to rebuild something better. The company's identity isn't just in its structure, it's in its people, its values, and its ability to evolve. If we don't take action, if we don't adapt, we risk becoming irrelevant." The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus could see that the managers were still unsure, still wrestling with the idea of such sweeping changes. But he wasn't about to back down. He leaned forward, locking eyes with each one of them. "We've got two choices," he said firmly. "We can sit here, hold on to what's comfortable, and wait for the world to leave us behind. Or we can make bold decisions, take calculated risks, and shape the future of this company. It's your choice. But I know where I stand." The room was silent for a few long moments, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Finally, Carl spoke again, though his tone had softened. "I still think this is risky, Marcus," he said, "but I see where you're coming from. We'll give it a shot, but you need to make sure you're communicating this to the entire company. We need clarity." Marcus nodded, a small but satisfied smile tugging at his lips. "I'll make sure of it, but I need your support, Carl. All of you." The senior managers exchanged looks, and slowly, one by one, they nodded. It wasn't full acceptance. Not yet, but it was a start. Marcus knew he had made some headway, but the real challenge would come when the changes started rolling out. Would the rest of the company fall in line, or would they resist? As he left the meeting room, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the first of many tough conversations. But that was all right. He was ready for it. The hardest part was always pushing through the resistance, and he had already taken the first step. Now he had to show the company that he wasn't just talking about change, he was making it happen. The next few days were a whirlwind for Marcus. He was in and out of meetings, fielding phone calls from investors, strategizing with his leadership team, and answering questions from employees who were unsure about what the future would hold. The tension in the company was palpable. It was as if the entire organization was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as the days went by, Marcus noticed something, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. It wasn't dramatic, but it was there. The sense that people were beginning to pay attention. They were watching him closely, testing him to see if his promises of change would really amount to something, or if they were just empty words. One afternoon, as he sat at his desk, sifting through reports, Emily knocked on his door, her face tight with concern. "Marcus, there's a situation. A few employees from the IT department have started a petition. They're upset about the restructuring and the changes to their roles. They want you to address their concerns directly." Marcus felt a pang of frustration. The IT department was a crucial part of the company, and he couldn't afford to alienate them. But he also knew that this was a part of the process. Change wasn't going to be smooth. There would always be resistance, always be those who felt threatened by what was to come. What mattered was how he responded. "Set up a meeting with them," Marcus said, his voice steady. "I'll talk to them myself." Emily nodded, and within an hour, he found himself sitting in the same conference room he had met with the senior managers just days before, facing a group of employees from the IT department. They were a small group, but their faces were full of concern, and a few were even angry. Marcus could feel the tension in the air the moment he stepped into the room. One of the employees, a woman named Rachel, spoke first. "Marcus, we appreciate you meeting with us, but we feel like we're being left out of the conversation. The changes you're implementing are disrupting our department, and we don't know where we fit in all this." Marcus nodded, acknowledging her concern. "I hear you, Rachel. I understand that this is unsettling, but let me be clear. These changes are not meant to hurt anyone. They're meant to create a stronger, more efficient company. That means making tough decisions, but also creating new opportunities." Another employee, Tom, chimed in, his voice filled with frustration. "But you're talking about restructuring entire teams. You're taking away positions that some of us have worked hard to build. We're scared, and we don't see how this is going to make anything better." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes focused on Tom. "I get it, I really do. It's difficult to see the bigger picture when you're in the middle of a change. But here's the thing. What we're doing isn't about cutting people down. It's about putting the right people in the right positions so that we can grow together. We're building a new culture here, and that means we all need to be flexible. We need to be adaptable." Rachel crossed her arms, still unconvinced. "But how do we know that we're going to be part of this future you're talking about? How do we know our jobs are safe?" Marcus took a deep breath. This was the hardest question. The fear of losing a job, of not knowing what was going to happen next, was the one thing that could truly shake the foundation of a team. He had to make them believe that they were not just employees in a company, but key players in its transformation. "I can't guarantee that every position will stay exactly the same. That's the reality of any big change," Marcus said, his voice softer now. "But I can promise you this. I'm committed to making sure that each one of you has a role in our future. This is going to be a company where everyone has the chance to grow, and that means supporting each other, even when it's hard." The room was quiet for a moment. Marcus could see that his words were having an impact, but there was still doubt in their eyes. They wanted proof. They needed to see that the future he was promising was real. And Marcus knew that the only way to show them that was through action. "Here's what I'll do," Marcus said, standing up and pacing in front of them. "I'll set up a series of one-on-one meetings with each of you. We'll talk about your concerns, your ideas, and how we can better align your roles with the new direction. I want you to feel confident that you're part of this process." Rachel, who had been quiet until now, spoke up again. "I appreciate that, Marcus. I think we just need to know that we're not being left behind." "You won't be," Marcus replied, his voice firm with conviction. "We're all in this together." The tension in the room started to ease, though there was still an air of uncertainty. As the meeting came to an end, Marcus made a mental note to follow through on his promise. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight. But if he could show these employees that their concerns were being heard and addressed, then he could start building the trust that was so essential for this company's future. As the IT team filed out of the room, Marcus sat back down at the table, reflecting on the conversation. He knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more pushback. But he had seen something important today, that despite their doubts and fears, people were starting to listen. And for Marcus, that was the first real sign that change was coming. The following week was crucial. Marcus knew it. His calendar was filled with back-to-back meetings, each one designed to tackle a specific area of the company's transformation. The IT department had been the first to raise Con 43 concerns, but it wouldn't be the last. Marcus anticipated more pushback from other departments, particularly those that had been doing things a certain way for years, with little to no real changes. It was these departments he was most concerned about, the ones who had grown comfortable in their routines and were resistant to anything that threatened their stability. But despite all the challenges, there was something that had shifted in the last few days. It wasn't just that the employees had started to see him as someone who was approachable, but that they were starting to believe in his vision. He had made it clear that the restructuring wasn't just about cutting costs or reducing headcount. It was about creating opportunities, giving people the space to grow, and fostering a culture where everyone could contribute. By the end of the week, Marcus had personally met with most of the department heads and several key staff members. The conversations weren't always easy, but they were honest, and that, he realized, was the key. People wanted to know that their voices mattered, that their concerns were being taken seriously. And when Marcus had been able to address their worries with transparency, the hostility had begun to ease. One particular meeting had stuck out in Marcus's mind. It had been with Laura, the head of human resources. Laura was a sharp, no-nonsense type of person who had been with the company for nearly a decade. She was skeptical of Marcus's plans, and rightfully so. She had seen leadership come and go, each one promising grand changes that fizzled out before they even got off the ground. She had little patience for more empty promises. In the end, Marcus's unwavering commitment to transparency and collaboration pays off as the company's culture begins to transform. Despite initial resistance, his leadership gains traction, with employees from all levels starting to embrace the changes. By the time the restructuring is fully implemented, the company is not only more innovative and adaptable, but also more unified in its vision for the future. Marcus proves that effective leadership isn't just about making bold decisions. It's about earning trust, listening to concerns, and bringing people along on the journey of change. The company emerges stronger, more dynamic, and ready to take on new challenges.